So what really is our future going to be like? What exactly are we focusing on? Is the Silicon Valley model necessarily the India model? I think those are a couple of questions which we're going to be looking at. Love to introduce Lath Carlson, the Executive Director of the Museum of the Future, who's with us. Would you like to come on the stage so that we can have a quick chat on a couple of these themes which we've been looking at? And of course, your experience has been so wide. Particularly when it comes to seeing firsthand innovation at so many levels. But it was interesting because it's a nice segue for me. Sachin was speaking about Silicon Valley, and he was speaking about how the India model may or may not be that. So for starters, what are 5 factors that have made Silicon Valley, and how do you believe India may need to be different?
Fantastic, yeah, and thank you for that opening remarks, because I think it sets the tone very well. I would say that you don't want to build another Silicon Valley, but what you should understand is how Silicon Valley was built and how it works to do something different. And I think the main thing to do different is to focus on the global customers, the global needs. I think Silicon Valley has done a great job of targeting a very narrow segment of the population, but they haven't broadly addressed global needs. And so in my previous work, I spent a number of years in Silicon Valley and studying kind of why it worked. And we always used to have people coming and saying, well, we want to build the next Silicon Valley. And I'd say, well, let's talk about why Silicon Valley works. And so, yeah, we found 5 key determinants of why Silicon Valley is hard to reproduce, but it's good to understand them. And the first is the importance of Stanford University. In India, there's clearly amazing technical universities. There are, as well as UAE and other places, but they don't play the same entrepreneurial role that Stanford does. There are very few universities that encourage their professors to be advisors to startups. Very few universities that actually invest directly in startups. Very few universities that actually are fine with their students leaving to start startups. And knowing all of my friends from India and the UAE, the thought that their kids would actually drop out of school is slightly horrifying, most of them. Right? Whereas at Stanford, it's actually an accepted part of the experience. And most of my former employers, like Paul Allen, Bill Gates, people had never graduated university, right? So that's important, is the role of Stanford. I think the number 2 thing is the role of venture capital. In Silicon Valley, it's very easy to go to Sand Hill Road, which is still, I think, the greatest concentration of VC money in the world, and have a series of meetings in a day or a week and get your funding. That's very hard to do other places. So that's very important. Another factor that's maybe not so obvious is how easy it is to set up the rest of your business in Silicon Valley. So when you need HR services, legal services, business licenses, things like that, there's an incredible ecosystem that supports that. You can often do those things in a matter of days, not weeks or months or years, as in some parts of the world. So I think it makes it very easy to kind of get those things that we often take for granted applied to your startup and get moving very quickly. The last couple factors, I think, are also kind of hidden things that people don't talk about as much. One is non-competes. So California is one of only 3 American states where non-competes are unenforceable. And the other 2 are, I believe, South Dakota and Oklahoma, which are not really known as hubs of innovation, right? So it's one of the rare place where non-compete agreements are void. So you can leave a company like Google the next day, build a competitor. That's a really important part of what makes Silicon Valley work. And having lived in Seattle as well, that's a thing that doesn't exist in Washington State. And so you don't see, I think, as much of the startup ecosystem there. So I think those are the kind of top 4 that are talked about a lot, that are, I would say, more policy-driven, more things that you can look at as from anywhere in the world and say, okay, how do we create, get our universities to be more entrepreneurial? How might we, make sure those support services are easier to access? VC capital is a bit more challenging, but still there's things you can do to create that. And certainly here in UAE, we're pushing to do that. The final factor, though, I think is one that's more difficult maybe to address because it's more of a cultural issue. And I think very rarely is this talked about. But in America, and actually all of the Americas, and I would say also Australia and New Zealand, kind of have a unique cultural attribute, which is a high respect for self-sufficiency and doing things yourselves and doing things with your hands. And this is something I absolutely have not seen the same level of respect for, in this part of the world, and in India and other places that don't have the same kind of historical background. And I think it's incredibly critical. The fact that in all the kind of, very famous, visionary technologists and innovators in America that I've had the pleasure to spend time with all go back to talking about their childhood and how they built things with Legos, they tinkered with computers, they took apart, appliances and figured out how they worked and fixed them, they worked on cars, they did all of these things with their hands and with mechanical and technological things directly and had that direct experience with figuring out how these things worked.
Sure.
And within a cultural context in which that was valued. Back in America, if I told somebody I was, fixing the brakes on my car, they would be impressed. Here, they'd be kind of horrified. They'd be like, well, why are you doing that?
We like
They'd
to
be
have 10
mystified
people doing
by
that
it.
for us.
What's that?
We like to have 10
Yes,
people doing that
absolutely,
for us.
right. And I think, but that's a real problem, I think.
But let me ask you this. I think you've raised some critical points. I think, for starters, when you spoke about the importance of Stanford, you spoke about the importance of education and education nurturing talent to go forward in this tech space in Silicon Valley. India has wonderful educational institutions. Our IITs are absolutely phenomenal. And a lot of people leave India and travel to the West, to Silicon Valley. Do you believe that is part of the problem that India needs to overcome, that we need to have the base in India to sustain this talent?
I think so. I think, when you see people leaving, I think it's more because they see the other parts of this ecosystem more readily available in places, like Silicon Valley, and other, even, here increasingly in the UAE, we see this, people coming here because it's easy to get the visas, it's easy to set up a business here, it's easy to get those support services, right? So I think that may be part of why you see people leaving. And they also, I think there is this kind of mystique of going to America, to going to this place that has been known for innovation, right? And I think that builds on itself. And I think you do, and now we see, so many American technology companies led by people of Indian origin, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is, unsurprising, really.
Do you think that India, on the other hand, has a huge advantage in companies in the IT sector in India who develop, design, produce, and sell according to an Indian price estimate?
Yeah.
A huge advantage.
Absolutely.
And that perhaps is that big bridge that India can probably use and then get to the other side, become much bigger than we are.
I think so, and as I said, I think that Silicon Valley has done a great job of addressing a narrow part of the population, right? And then a lot of the rest of the world has had to take those innovations from the Valley and adapt them to the local context. That's not really the right way to do it, right? The right way to do it is understand the local context, build for that, and actually the local context is a much larger addressable population than the kind of narrow slice of basically middle-class white Americans, right? That most of the things in Silicon Valley get built for. So I think it's a huge advantage.
What about VC funding? Do you believe that that is something which actually defines Silicon Valley?
I think so.
There is the money to get the job done.
I mean, just look at the numbers, right? I mean, just looking at how much of that capital is concentrated there and continues to be, I think that, that is a challenge, right? It's like, it's easier to kind of look at these other things and go, okay, how can we change policy? How can we kind of make that easier? Attracting that sort of VC money because it's concentrated generally in the hands of people who have had successful businesses that they've launched, they've done quite well, they've taken some of that money, they've attracted other money, put it in a pool, and are funding. So you kind of need that to kind of continue, right?
Sure.
And like you said, when you have people leaving the country, then that concentration of that money is now outside the country, maybe then back in it.
I think it's also true to state that in terms of the funding required, there isn't necessarily any difference in the amount, whether it's India or America. And this is, I follow the defense sector very closely and a lot of AI-linked applications, for example, in the drone space. You need a certain amount of capital. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in America or you're sitting in India. So I would suggest that the amount or the volume of VC funding isn't consistent across the world. It certainly isn't the same in India. And therefore, that's a step back for innovators looking to design and manufacture.
Agreed. Although I will say that increasingly, some of the things that you used to need money for, building your own servers and own infrastructure and things like that, increasingly you don't need to do. Right? With AWS and all these other ways, it's easy to kind of scale infrastructure. I think that then what you're spending a lot of that money on is people. Right? And if your labor costs are lower, then you have an advantage. You don't have to raise so much money. If you can get top quality technical talent for less money, I think that's an advantage. And as we've seen, particularly in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Seattle, the cost of living is so high, you're paying people a lot of money based on that.
We get more self-sufficient when we get to Silicon Valley. On the way there, we've got 10 people helping us. Let's talk about non-competes. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that is so important, because it nurtures talent and technology and innovation?
Yeah, I think that it's so important because you do need people who are within a company and they're maybe a little frustrated and they're saying, okay, this isn't going the way I would do it, giving them the opportunity to immediately leave and build something that can be better, right? Or can address a different population. And I think you need to have that openness. You need to be dynamic in that way, And I do believe, I'm not 100% on this, but India also has not enforced non-competes, right? And I think that's a huge advantage if you actually have that ability for people to jump around like that, start new things.
Before we end, this part of the chat, you've built the Tech Museum in Seattle. You've researched how innovation happens. So how does innovation happen?
I think it's those 5 things, right? I think you need a population of people who really grow up from an early age, being empowered to make things, to break things, to fix things, to really get into how these things work. But then you need to support them as they go, into life. So you need to provide that educational context that continues to give them the skills to, make and break bigger things.
What are some of the most inspiring things in terms of innovation that you have seen or you've experienced through the process of building the Tech Museum?
That's a really great question. Honestly, I think in this particular, with the Museum of the Future, I think the most interesting thing was we worked with collaborators truly around the globe, about 25 collaborators globally on the project, and just how seamless that process was, right? And we started that work before COVID. COVID came, and it didn't interrupt us at all. The fact that we could actually build, and we're building hardware, software, big physical things truly globally, and to do that with almost no impact from a global pandemic was incredible, I think, to do.
Absolutely superb. Do be with us, on the stage. We've got some wonderful panelists who are now going to come on and tell us a little bit about their experience. Ananth, Nagaraj, can you come on? Thanks very much for being with us. Parag, Naik, and Kitty Agarwal. Would you like to, or I can just shift over there. Come. Thank you. So, each of these professionals have focused a lot in different areas. They are part of the effort at growing the India story, making it realistic, exploring new avenues, and it's great that we've got them with us. Kitty, let me come to you first. We were talking about this briefly. India going global at Indian costs. How is that something which is a huge advantage for us?
So I think that's very interesting. I think we often talk about Indian costs being much lower and how that can help us leverage and go global. But I do think that it can also go wrong for a lot of folks who try. So what's very important is how do you identify the exact segment, country? Do you have enough local networks in that geography to plug into that play? And then, specifically, I've seen, for example, sectors like exports, software, IT services, which naturally plug into developed markets and help us keep to our costs and service. So the cost of service, the cost of delivery, the cost of acquisition, etc., in these spaces can really play out to India's advantage and the teams building here. But I just think that overall, though it's a great positive, any teams trying that or any companies trying that just need to be really aware because it can be costly to go wrong.
Ananth, let's talk a little bit about frugal innovation. I think the best example of this is ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, who's been doing missions to Mars at a cost of a Hollywood film. How is this perhaps one of the biggest aspects which can help India grow? It's very much a part of our culture. It's something we always think about. How do we save money? But this could actually work to our advantage.
Yes, so essentially if you look at what ISRO has been doing in tech or what multiple product companies that are building out from India to the world, they try to innovate on every aspect, whether it be the plain resources that is required. ISRO did not spend the same amount of money that NASA would do to launch their rockets. Or say even I was talking to some guys at AI Tech Park in Bangalore, where they built very low cost X-ray analyzers. And this was used globally during COVID times. I mean, people all across the world would have X-ray sent to this thing that was built in AI Tech Park in Bangalore. And for them to do that, they did not even spend millions of dollars there. I think it was $500,000 with which they were able to build out an X-ray analyzer, which helped most of the people across the world during COVID times. I mean, the inherent ability of India to think, okay, let me do a jugaad to get this solved, and building product based on that ideology is something that has helped us to frugally innovate.
Could you give us more examples of that?
Yeah, one is this example which I gave. The other example in the business that I do, we build conversational AI technologies. When we started to build speech rec engines for India, the country is so diverse. We speak tens of languages. The data that a company like Google or Amazon would spend would be like $100, $150 to build for an audio, or it could be same with image to get labeled data out. And again, for India, you could not spend 10,000 hours to acquire 10,000 hours of data to build a good speech engine. You need to spend millions of dollars. To do that, again, how do you acquire your data, keeping the data privacy in mind? That is where the whole innovation process exists, because you have the biggest advantage of India is its people.
Right.
How do you use this people efficiently in a structured way so that your underlying costs are lower, and then you use your, again, the tech labor is much, much cheaper to get world-class talent. How do you use them effectively to innovate onto the problem that you are solving?
Sure. Parag, shall we talk a little bit about deep tech in India? Sure. Hardware, and then we can talk about semiconductors later on. But is this an area we need to overcome? You're brilliant in software, but a lot of the hardware applications linked to tech don't naturally come to us so far.
Just a small digression.
Sure.
And it's interesting to listen to Lath on
Yeah.
what built Silicon Valley. There are two other aspects that I've been studying up
In Silicon, in terms of
Silicon Valley. One is the early adopter. Right? And any sufficiently new technology is always 70% complete. It needs early adopters to pull that technology out of you and mature it. So there are people who understand, can spot those technologies, right? And that's an important ingredient. The second part also is the quality of the VC investor there. And most of the VC investors there have been operationally running companies. So they have operational experience of running startups or seeing these through. That's the challenge, right? The ability to spot something which is very early on is still not very, very prevalent in India. And there are these one-look people that I've met a lot of them. They can look at you and say whether you are capable of delivering it. Those three ingredients on top of what he said also made Silicon Valley. Of course, bad managers. William Shockley created, the Silicon Valley because he was a bad manager, and then 5 of them actually left and started different companies. Coming back to the hardware part, I think there has been, for historically and since the 80s, right, there has been issues with import and all of them, and that's why software flew under the radar, so to speak, of the government, and then it got into a virtuous cycle. And it's not that we've been bad at hardware. It's just that there has not been focus, there has not been limelight on it. And you look at it, it's the same in the US as well right now, right? In the Valley, hardly people are going into semiconductors. The bright guys are all going into, unfortunately, building apps for selling stuff on the internet. I mean, there's been excessive focus in India in the last decade, again on unicorns and on I would say vanity metrics more than anything. But fundamentally, even in the US, most of the folks who build hardware are from Indian origin.
It's an interesting point. And in as much as I asked that question about whether it is difficult for Indians to cross that big bridge and be, a top line in terms of hardware, there are areas where we have done brilliantly well in hardware. And I'd like to talk about one of them since it seems to have come up. Again, in terms of in having covered aviation as closely as I have or I do, we have a fighter jet which we built in India. It's called the Tejas, or the light combat aircraft. When India was hit by sanctions, a co-development project with Lockheed Martin in the United States was halted. So we went about and developed quadruplex redundant fly-by-wire systems. This has ensured that this particular platform, and touch wood this remains, has not had a single crash. It's safer than any other fighter aircraft in the Indian fleet. We have mastered carbon composite technology with multiple applications across the field. We have now moved to developing state-of-the-art radar systems, advanced electronic arrays, ASA radars as it were, electronic arrays for this particular aircraft. The overall percentage hardware of this will now step up to almost 80 to 85%. And that's because we don't have engine technology yet. In India, that's a holy grail.
By the
But
way,
when we
I
talk about
I worked
that-
on that project in the early 90s.
You did?
Yeah, I did work
And,
on this.
we'll chat about that. You guys can, no. No, but it's just a remarkable story of how no one believed we'd do it. And it's there, it's flying.
Absolutely.
Squadron strength now.
Absolutely. So I think, one way we have to differ from Silicon Valley is building ecosystems, right? And we've done that on the UPI side, on the other side, the India stack. I mean, we need something similar on the hardware. The problem is hardware has got a pregnancy time, unlike software. There's a certain amount of time that you need to spend to get expertise. And like Lath said, you got to, there's less of logic and more of art.
Right.
Especially when you dabble with stuff with RF and all of that. So you need, the basic criteria to get to a hardware engineer is much longer than the software guy, right?
Right.
You can't fail as fast in hardware as you can fail fast in software. That's one of the problems. So if for us to succeed, we need to spend about 10 to 15 years and a critical mass of people looking at it, and one of them will succeed, right? Mm-hmm. For example, we've spent 14 years in building silicon for the communication variety.
Yeah.
For originally for wireless applications, now for 5G. So once you spend that amount of time, you inherently build expertise in it, right? And that's how that ecosystem grows. And once it's also like the Stanford, you need one mothership around which everything grows around. So then the Tejas story, taking it further, it would have built a whole lot of small ecosystem players around it. So one guy goes up, he builds it, and then it becomes a virtuous circle.
And that's exactly right, because we've got another company in India called Dynamatics. Dynamatics is now been tasked with building large parts of the fuselage and the wings of this aircraft. Again, through Dynamatics, you've spawned an aerospace industry which sort of supports Dynamatics itself. Again, they have taken carbon composite technology and the pace of manufacture to a level which applies not just for this project, but can be used across civil aviation. And that's, again, something that we haven't really spoken about. And I think that is part of the problem, Mr. Carlson. Would you agree that India needs to talk a lot more about where we are in terms of hardware? There is so much.
Yeah, I would say that the other thing that Americans tend to do quite well is self-promotion, right? And get out there and talk themselves up and sometimes maybe exaggerate a little bit, as we're seeing in the news lately, right? But I think it really helps, right? It helps to get your story out. It helps to shape the narrative yourself rather than let other people shape it for you, right? So I think the more you can do to get that out there, and I think that, you see, obviously, even the creation of this museum here in Dubai is part of telling Dubai's story in that way and shaping that narrative, right? I would encourage looking at, okay, how do you find every channel to kind of get that out there and tell those stories to the public.
Kitty, in as much as we want to talk up the India story, or on the basis of a lot which has been done, we have to also realize that there'll be failures, and we need to have the ability to stomach failures. You might have more failures than successes, but that is the role. In India, we are terribly critical of those who don't succeed. It's part of our mindset, but there is a huge, long learning curve, isn't there?
Yes, I agree. I do think it's getting better because, now if let's say someone tried to do their own company and that didn't succeed, then the kind of options that open up for them and the kind of, when they want to do a second stint, the number of investors who want to leverage on their earlier experience is increasing, I think. But overall, yes, I would say that we are way less forgiving. I don't think it's just about society. I think it's also how hard we are on ourselves as individuals. Right from the time we are born, we are always competing. There's so many people in India, you're always competing through and through. And usually, the folks who have done really well and then they stumble, they try something new, it doesn't work, they spend 10 years, just the kind of pressure they can put on themselves. I think society doesn't enable them to enable it to get easier. I think overall we're getting better, but yes, we have a long way to go.
Ananth, before we started this, we were talking about AI and artificial intelligence systems for which might have an impact on the lives of Indians. Firstly, What are some of those technologies that you feel can have a real impact, and how do you scale that to 1 billion plus people?
See, one thing that I'm a strong advisor of AI. Thing in AI is, say for example, let's take voice tech. To the world that is mature enough, it is more of not a necessity, it is a luxury. But in India, where you have 400, 500 million people who just can't read and write, for them, a conversing system with machine, right? A machine could talk to them in their own language, answer their basic queries, could be on health, could be on educating them on policies, on their helping them out onto multiple things. This is something an AI system could do.
Right.
I mean, this is like an Alexa in a different form and world that can talk to them in their own language, could be in Punjabi, could be in Malayalam, could be in Marathi, answering them basic queries on healthcare or money management. We are talking on UPI stack, which is like predominantly infused into the country, but that is to the people who have internet. And there is a significant part of the country which is coming up into this portion of using internet for the very first time, could be for financial access, healthcare access, etc. And for them, having an AI system that could talk to them, understand their query, responding to them in their own language. Also guide them through different set of processes, etc. Right? And the diversity or the challenges an AI system has to solve to enable this is tremendously more than what an Alexa or a Google Home would do to someone in the West sitting in their home playing music. So once you solve, or once a technology solves problems like this, it becomes easier to scale it globally. I mean, this is just on that aspect. I mean, if you look at autonomous driving, someone who can solve a driving car in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore roads can solve it everywhere else.
Yeah, let's hope our roads get there. So I think, Parag, I think in terms of this conversation, we really should speak a little bit about your companies as well, and I'll come to all of you. You're the founder of Saankhya Labs. Could you give us a few ideas of some of the areas that you're looking at very closely?
So we pioneered in a technology much before Valley or anybody else in a concept called software-defined radios that originally originated in the military parlance. We brought it to the consumer domain. We build, what's called layer ones, or we build modems for wireless systems, satellite communications. ISRO is one of our customers for broadcast systems, and now we are working on 5G. Building infrastructure side 5G.
Software-defined radios are helping to redefine the Indian Air Force.
Yes.
Guidance to missiles.
Exactly.
Bypassing standard radars.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal technology. Could you give us an idea of how this will actually impact so many people across India as the technology matures?
Yeah, as it matures, the ability to, we've gone from software-defined to we're defining something called a cognitive radio, which is basically the ability for a radio to learn and adapt itself based on the environment. And RF environment is pretty dynamic. And most modems or standards 4G or 5G are built to a certain set of protocols or rules that are baked in for worst case scenarios. So we are building radios now that actually understand the environment and then adapt themselves. So
they jump frequencies? They're frequency
They could
agile?
jump frequency. They're frequency agile. They're modulation agile, which means you can change based on this. And
that means they're secure?
They are secure. By definition, they're secure. So that would be some of the attributes of advanced 5G and into 6G. So some of that technologies have already started taking shape in India. The advantage to the consumer, we are a B2B company, so we don't directly talk to the consumer. But advantage indirectly to the consumer is obviously better cost per bit. So he pays lesser money, and also better quality of service.
Sure. You mentioned 6G. In fact, I was speaking to Rajiv Chandrasekhar. I mentioned this earlier on yesterday. And he spoke about how, look, Vishnu, don't focus only on 5G. Talk about 5G as being the road to 6G. But in simple terms, can any of you tell me what 6G would entail? We're barely getting used to 5G now. What would 6G, any of you?
You want me to take
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just mentioned that, right? Networks that design themselves. So today, the whole, the way networks are designed is there's a standardization body that people get together and debate for years, and there's more politicking than technology, and then that gets baked in and that gets implemented. So going forward, radios that learn themselves, radios from the cloud, ML-driven, machine learning or AI-driven cognitive radios are the ones which will do. The connectivity, ubiquitous connectivity to all at Indian price points.
Right.
Is another aspect of 6G. And since it is still amorphous, different people have different, ideas of what 6G is going to be. That's our, that's our version of 6G. Anybody else, different people will have different versions of what 6G is going to be. So,
can you tell us a little bit about InfoEdge?
So I lead InfoEdge Ventures specifically. That is the venture capital firm that spun out of InfoEdge, which is the first listed internet company in India. And we have about $600 million under AUM. We invest across sectors, but we just do tech companies. So startups partner with them pretty early and hopefully partner with them for the long term. Couple of the big ones for us have been Zomato and Policy Bazaar. I think Ashish is also here. He's spoken before. Where we were seed to IPO investors.
Are you optimistic about the startup space in India?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or are we in a bit of a winter right now?
We are in a bit of a winter, but I think, cycles play out through all kinds of asset classes. And I wouldn't be able to find too many people who would say we didn't see it coming, because the kind of prices we saw last year, and we were all in the market. I mean, some of our companies got the markups, but we were also having to compete at those insane prices for newer investments. And so everyone was kind of waiting for it. No one knew when it would hit, and it just hit so suddenly. But usually if you go back and you see how history of asset class pricing plays out, if you're in it for the long term, which you have to be as venture capital investors, I think you just learn to ride through various cycles and guide your portfolio companies and help keep the cash runway on.
So actually, winter is a wrong metaphor for India. Winters are good in India, right? So it's summer. It's an Indian
much
summer,
more
right?
comfortable.
So it's an Indian summer. So you get into the shade when there's summer. So come back after the shade is gone.
But have your investments in various companies in the startup space been affected over the last, certainly during the COVID period and after that? Are you wary as an investor this time?
So I think what is not very clear to us, and I think a lot of folks in the ecosystem, is when the capital pools, people are sitting on a lot of capital, but when the real deployment in the mid to growth to late stages is going to come back. So there's still a lot of seeding happening of startups, I think, and early stage is still doing relatively well. So we're just being a little more circumspect in terms of, giving enough capital to companies so that they can execute for at least 24 months. They don't have to hit the market again. Are we backing frugal entrepreneurs? Do they understand capital efficiency? Do they understand the market's different and they might not get a 10x markup in a year, which was being done last year?
Yep.
So I think we're just being, I would say, a little more realistic. But if you're actually an investor through and through, I think you just learn to hold your horses and wait it out.
And tell us a little bit about, as CEO of your company, Gnani.ai.
So at Gnani, we build conversational AI systems that help enterprises improve their customer experience. So it could be telephony line, conversational bots that answer customer queries 24/7, or help your agents on a call. It's an AI sitting behind an agent, human agent, solving your customers' queries more efficiently. So what we have been doing, we were India focused for quite some time, build it for India, multiple languages, scaled it, and the call volumes that India handles is insane.
Phenomenal.
Compared to anyone in West. And the number of intents, entities, it's one bank offering.
We also have a unique set of problems.
Yeah.
When we get on the line and start complaining about a certain service.
Yes.
How do you actually figure out what those may be? Because there can be so many.
Yeah, so essentially the way we have built it is a cohesive system where the L1, L2 queries that are like, if you look at any of these enterprises, 70% of their queries are repeatable. And the next 30 is where you actually require human emotion and empathy. What we have done is we have a plain AI model that can understand the 70% of query, answers it without a human intervention, and the rest we help human answer it better. Could be pulling out information from different knowledge banks, or it could be pulling out information from different CRMs in the enterprise world, all of it is available on a screen at disposal.
Right.
So essentially, instead of putting a customer, hey, I'll put you on hold, give me 30 seconds, 40 seconds, which will typically be 3 minutes, and come back, we have an answer ready-made on an agent screen, which you could just read out. And building this for a complex country like India, when we landed our first global national bank globally, it was such an ease for us. I mean, the queries that they get is so structured, so easy. Complaints they get from their customers are so easier to handle. And in India, it is like where it goes all across. And
are you constantly expanding the parameters on which you are able to answer questions?
Yes. So this is
how do you do that?
This is a continuous learning system that keeps going on. So what we call in the AI world as semi-supervised, unsupervised learnings. So essentially, in a semi-supervised system, you have someone who corrects, trains the system to get better and better. Mm-hmm. In completely unsupervised learning, the system automatically tries to understand better based on previous historical conversations and the conversation that keeps going to improve the system accuracy, intents better.
Sure.
When we keep adding newer queries, it would be more of a semi-supervised learning that we bring in, and then the system goes into a completely unsupervised mode.
Right. Mr. Carlson, before I go back to Parag and talk a little bit about semiconductors, this is an area which is going to define growth for so many countries. It's also mired in geostrategic issues. The entire China versus Taiwan issue. The fact that demand in countries, for example, like India is so huge for semiconductors, we can't buy cars because it takes a year for a car to be delivered. I know this firsthand. Could you give us an idea of how it is critical for semiconductor technology to be more broad-based in terms of availability?
I think that what we've seen certainly in COVID is the supply chain situation globally, and it's not just semiconductors, right? I think that it's the capital expense to build a fab is so big, right, that it takes a long time to sort that one out. But I do think we're in an age of actually decreasing globalization. We've seen this really since World War II, this increasing globalization, increasing supply chain spread everywhere, just-in-time deliveries, all of this. I think that's over, honestly. I think it's because of what's happening in Ukraine, because of COVID, because of a lot of factors right now, we're on the downward slope of that, right? But the good news of that is, other than building fabs, most other things are actually, the entry point is lower, right? It's lower cost to get into a lot of these other businesses. So I think if you sort out the semiconductor, which is the hardest right now, because not only is the cost high, but also as chip sizing gets smaller and smaller, right? You have complications with that. But I think the bigger story is everything else actually also reshoring, more things being done locally than being these distributed supply chains. I think that is, looking far into the future where everything needs to be heading to.
I just wanted to segue to another part of this broader, question on where technologies like semiconductor technology can be located, moving away from Japan or Taiwan. There's now this conversation at some levels of China versus India. China, of course, the scale is much larger. But you've got several companies, Apple most recently, wanting to invest in India with a host of items which they manufacture. Is there a certain advantage that India actually has?
Yeah, honestly, it's a really simple one. It's demographics. Right? China has a massive demographic problem, and we're seeing this now. It's very hard to attract workers there as the population ages, and because of past policies, there's not replacement population. That's a huge issue. I think that gets not enough attention, and it's starting to. I see it more and more in the press come up, and I think that is along with a lot of other factors certainly, but that's something India has a huge advantage in.
Is there a cost disadvantage in India in terms of big companies coming in?
I don't think so. Honestly, at this point, that doesn't seem to be the most critical thing, right? And I think also, India strategically, from a just geography standpoint, is quite well positioned too. So I think there's a lot going for India. Also,
this entire COVID situation and the fact that it's certainly not over in China, it's not over anywhere, but it's certainly not over in China, and the fact that it's had a huge impact on their industrial base. What are some of the key takeaways from that for you?
Well, I think, that is something that there couldn't be a clearer difference between the UAE and China on, right? The UAE from day one handled the pandemic, I think, better than almost any other country, right? And the result of that is coming out of it. We're incredibly well positioned here. I work more in tourism industry, right? And the numbers are back to 2019 or in excess of it, right? That's rare globally, and I think a lot of it has to do with how well things were handled here. I think, China obviously took a different perspective, and, it initially seemed like a good move, but in the long term, it doesn't, seem to have played out quite well. And it's going to cause repercussions for many, many years to come, right? As companies are now looking to move manufacturing to India, to other locations, that has a long-term, very strong impact there that they couldn't have foreseen, right?
Let's talk about semiconductors more from the technology standpoint. How do we assume that Indian-made semiconductors would be of that same standard? Because you're talking about extremely precision manufacture. Built at a certain price point, serving a huge amount of very sensitive applications. But this is a target area and a growth area for our government, and obviously it needs to be that. But what do you envisage as potential issues going forward towards achieving that goal?
Sure. There are two parts to the semiconductors. The one you alluded to is the manufacturing part. India, well, practically the ecosystem for manufacturing is non-existent in India. Right? There's SCL in Chandigarh that's really for 6 to 10 generations away. But what we are good at in India and where the maximum value gets derived is design.
Right.
In fact, outside of Valley, probably Bangalore is got the highest density of design engineers. So that aspect we are very strong, and in that aspect we are already competing with the best in the world. Right. So, for example, we have built chips that won against, in fact, large well-known companies. So we bid against them and won against them.
Right.
Sockets there. On the manufacturing part, we've just started. It's going to take us at least 5 to 10 years, to get to a point where we've got an ecosystem that understands these things. And
Semiconductors, yeah.
the semiconductor manufacturing part,
Right.
building, that will take us about 5 to 10 years.
Could you tell us that challenge?
Yeah.
The process and the ecosystem which needs to exist
Right.
to support what your goals are.
Yeah.
And quality.
Sure. People pass off software as tech. Everybody talks about software as tech. That is real tech, right? So to build a semiconductor manufacturing plant needs knowledge of chemistry, needs quantum physics, precision optical. You need to build lenses. You need to build high-end, again, software that drive all of this, and then of course lithography machines and all of that. So practically every aspect of engineering and physics and chemistry is covered in that. So the supply chain even there is global, actually, right? There are companies in Japan that make some chemicals. There are companies, there's ASML that everybody has now heard of, which actually makes the lithography machines. There is all over the place. So you won't be able to replicate all of that in India, but at least parts of it, and to be able to play in the supply chain part, we will be able to do. Because fundamentally, we have got good, basic sciences education in India. If that gets nurtured, unfortunately, material science and physics has been fairly neglected because of the software boom. So once that gets in, I think in 5 to 10 years we'll get there. And it took Taiwan basically 20 years, right? 25 years to get where they are. So that's the time frame. And just to give you an analogy, right? There's also, if you look at China's growth and also the growth in the spurt of medals in Olympics, that also kind of coincides. There's a correlation there.
Together.
Yeah, it takes you 15, 20 years to build that. And so there are no shortcuts there. You have to do that.
Yeah. Are there any questions? If anybody has any questions, if you just raise your hand, or I can continue over here. Is there anybody who has an observation or a question? Just feel free to raise your hand. Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself before?
Myself is Amitabh. I work in digital innovation. I just want to add on to 6G. You very rightly summarized the 6G ecosystem. Actually, 6G ecosystem is going to be totally different from 5G ecosystem. 6G ecosystem will be relying on Wi-Fi networks, which predominantly will also see transition from traditional telecom companies dispensing telecom signals to energy companies basically dispensing telecom signals. Right? So 6G systems will be almost 100 times faster than the existing 5G systems, but on Wi-Fi ecosystem. It is not on a same bandwidth as 5G. So your entire 5G networks will totally disband in coming few years. and 60 systems or Li-Fi systems are designed to be free to air. The governments basically will be compelled to dispense it free to air.
How many years away are we from mature 6G?
60 technically is already available,
Yeah.
but the governments are in a predicament that if they introduce Li-Fi systems now, then your Do and Etisalat and Airtel, Aircell are out of jobs immediately. And
Because
Jio-
of the hardware that exists.
hardware that exists
presently.
plus the conversion. So for instance, in Dubai, you already see there is a Li-Fi zone,
Yeah.
right? And there is already a company which can actually tomorrow take over dispensing Li-Fi systems called Diva's company. It's a Diva Digital
Right.
called Moro.
Right.
Moro is short form of tomorrow.
Right.
So Moro is basically your future company. So in India, your all electricity companies will start dispensing Li-Fi systems. That's how it is designed to.
Yeah. I saw some other hands. Yes, sir, go ahead. Could you identify? And I'll come to you after that.
Hey, I'm Sailf. I'm part of Riverwalk. It's an early stage VC fund. The question is to Ananth, you, because you come from conversational AI background. So the last decade was more of a, user-generated content, with content creators and the creator economy. Now with ChatGPT, recently launched, how do you see this, the entire ecosystem evolving? Because will the next decade be, AI-generated content? Can it, more specifically on the gaming industry, wanted to understand, because there's a lot of content which goes, while you are building apps, games, right? There's a lot of content progression as you go into the, multiple stages. So, would love to understand how this space is evolving. Love to get your insights.
See, I mean, if you look at ChatGPT 3 or anything that the AI generates, what we call it as generative AI networks, right? It could be through chat. I mean, what ChatGPT is typically giving you is they have built generative AI models with all data available on net to answer your queries, right? A generative or write a new blog, etc. Right? What is going to happen is with this NFT coming in and generative video getting into play, along with a ChatGPT sort of system which gives you a story behind it. So typically, if you look at the whole gaming industry, it is about the story that you are trying to take, and then is the animation, etc., that you build out. So with NFT, ChatGPT 3, and video AI or a generative video AI, it is highly possible that you see more and more AI-generated video content out in the market than coming in from content creators across the world. It could be different. I mean, today there are systems which take in 5 minutes of your face, can generate, and voice, can generate a complete news story that is spun off by you. We don't know whether it is actually said by you or it is an AI that is generated. And the creativeness, again, I mean, we are still a little far away on the creativeness of keeping the audience enticed with the content through AI. I think probably a couple of years down, we'll have characters, animations that can completely tell you really enticing story, and it is completely AI generated.
I had a question to ask you. How do you deal with Indian accents when it comes to designing software which recognizes questions? We have like 1 million of them.
Yeah, so typically, like if you take any language, the model that you train, do you cover the complete dialects of that? Say, for example, in India, we call it as the continuity thing, where a language changes every 20 kilometers. Every 20 kilometers in demography, the language or the dialect of that language keeps changing. So when you're building an AI system, you need to see that you have enough representative of people across these dialects who have given their data for training. And after that, the semi-supervised or the completely unsupervised learning comes into play. But initially, you need to know this diversity is important. And this is a big talk that happened before on AI bias. So essentially, the first image recognition algorithms could not recognize a class of people. That is because of the bias that was fed into the system.
I still face that problem on Android or Auto, but carry on, yes.
Yeah, so essentially, when you are trying to build AI systems, the initial stages were where you are trying to prove your algorithms, put something at work, then they realized bias that has inherently fed in. It was not because of doing it, it was more of an unknown bias that got in from the sample data that you used for your training.
Yeah.
And there were not, and in a country like India, as you said, because of the diversity, what is the price point you are ready to invest to handle this diversity?
Right.
Is there an economic benefit for me if I invest the data to train to handle, say, a language like Konkani, and will I get the commercial return? So it's a mix of data availability and what is the economic impact that you would get out of your system.
Go ahead, sir. And I'll come to you after that. Go ahead, sir. Just identify yourself once again for the benefit. I know who you are, but for the
my name is Dr. Mustafa Sasa. We are based in Dubai since 1958 into trading manufacturing services. In fulfilling the aspiration of 8 billion, we started with the incubation of the Silicon Valley and then moved to, how India is moving ahead digitally. My question is that, the impossibles of the past are imperatives of today. With 5G still not covering the whole world, we are talking 6G. So what are the impossibles of today which shall be imperatives of the future?
What are the impossibles of today which can be imperatives of the future? Any of you?
I'll take the perspective that we take in the museum. I mean, one of the huge issues we're facing is global clean energy, and truly global, right? So one of the exhibitions we have in the museum posits that space-based solar is pretty much the only way to solve that. Although with the recent news on fusion reaction, I think that that's also got some potential. But space-based solar, the ESA is working on it, universities in China are working on it, NASA's working on it. The big benefit there is it solves the transmission and storage issues that solar and all renewable energies right now have. So I think that's absolutely an imperative, for the future. But right now, it's just kind of a dream.
I think connectivity for all, right, at affordable prices. Today, I think connectivity is as important, right, as, it's become a fundamental right, I think. So that would be an imperative. And that's, whichever way we solve it, I think that's one of the things that we should do in 6G.
Sir?
Any one of you, but building...
So identify yourself, sir.
Fasi Ilahi. I have been a banker for 20 years, but now I am to advisory. Building onto your AI vision, actually, as you said, a lot coming on, and the next thing I see coming on is the metaverse. And it builds on from the gaming perspective that you just threw. But we don't hear much about the metaverse now. Where do you see it going? You and of course, the larger panel. Where does it, the panelists see it going? It's a larger thing thrown on us. Sure. I think the next 5 years belong to it, where it was behind, like when we used to say crypto 5 years back. Now it's the metaverse.
No, I agree with you.
And I think it's the benefit of the larger community here, and I think we'll have greater discussions over this over the dinner also. So I just wanted to open it with you, the right people, and.
So metaverse. Who wants to talk us through metaverse in the future?
Yes, please.
I can give it a shot.
Please.
So essentially, this is coming to him and coming to what you said. There's this large celebrity in US who reached out to us. He wanted to create a metaverse store for himself, where there is a digital avatar that is talking to his fans continuously. It is a video clone, voice clone of him in the metaverse, including the virtual reality systems that is out there, right? I think people are still exploring how do they bring in metaverse into various applications, and what is the form of delivery. I mean, if you look back 10 years back, it was like handheld phones, then was the smartphones. Whether the delivery of this whole metaverse, is it going to happen through your laptop screens, or it is going to happen through your mobile phones, or is a new set of device that is coming in? Yeah, so VR headsets, right? But again, the massive adaptation of VR headsets, or it would be like a goggle which has this, right? And once the clear winner of what is your delivery hardware that comes out, I think the application would span out. That is what I fundamentally believe in.
Me, no, I don't know. I'm an old school guy. I don't know why you need it. So it's vanity at this point. And there are some B2B applications that I think it would enable, like you're buying a house or stuff like that. But I don't know. I build. I'm 3 levels below the thing, right? We build. So we look at metaverse as an application for 5G. 5G was, if 4G was all about Uber actually drew 4G, right? Location app-based services drew 4G. So 5G hopefully will be driven by AR, VR stuff. But then the problem for that from a connectivity perspective is that it needs humongous amount of resources. The economic benefits for the operators to provide that level of connectivity is just not there yet today.
I think also when it comes to a transition to 5G, forget about 6G, the fact that your handsets have to be modified or changed or upgraded, it's a huge disincentive for a large number of people who are just now graduating in India to smartphones.
Right.
So that's going to be a factor going forward.
Absolutely.
Cost.
Absolutely. So in fact, to me, we are building a technology called D2M right now. We are piloting it in India, direct to mobile. It's a broadcasting technology that allows, there are about 300 million broadcast phones in India that are not, feature phones in India that have not been, they don't have any access. I'm sure the rest of the places in Africa and Latin America also have the same problems. So how do you give them video content without having them to pay even the 300 rupees a month or 250 rupees a month? That's an interesting piece that we are trying to look at.
And at the same time, the benefits of 5G, for example, the broadcast sector around the world, of which I am a part, has changed completely. Companies spend millions of dollars every year for outdoor broadcasting vans, for live broadcasts. You just do it now on your smartphone. It's HD and it's streamed. If you have good 5G speeds, you are saving incredible amounts of money. In fact, what we've done over here, our own interviews, which we were sending back to Delhi, was on a 5G handset. We could have broadcast live as well. So that is very much the future.
Yes.
Well, I have time just for another maybe question or two. Ma'am, would you like to go ahead? Just identify yourself, please. Sure, sir.
My name is Shraddha. I'm a market entry specialist. I help companies enter and navigate new markets. My question is for you, Mr. Carlson. Which geography or country or region you see coming closest to the Silicon Valley in terms of entrepreneurial ventures, especially in terms of cutting-edge technology and being global leaders? And if you could comment on the Chinese path to innovation, I would be very interested to know how you view that, and now with sort of the American sanctions on critical technologies, etc., how is China going to be a player in the development of innovation and disruption?
Kind of a softball question. I think, honestly, India is probably the best positioned right now, in part because of what's happening in China. And as I mentioned, some of the demographics and other trends, at play. I think there's a massive opportunity there because I think we see, Europe is struggling in various ways. And obviously, other parts of the world are also in, different conflicts and things that make it difficult for them to move this forward. And its geography, its demographics, and it's frankly, like education level of the population and things is there for it to be very well positioned. I think, China, where they've excelled, and I think also often, India has excelled, right, is at taking existing technologies and innovating on them, whether it's how they're produced, it's price point, it's all of these things, right? I think that it's very challenging to go to that, to truly creating new products and services that didn't exist before. And that's what Silicon Valley has done well. And, in my opening, this is why I talk about these kind of 5 factors being critical. Those 5 factors are really only critical for that kind of innovation. That's a different kind of innovation than going to a price point or going to a broad population demographic and things like that, right? And I think to get to that kind of innovation, though, is going to require addressing kind of all 5 of those points that I made, and because they all play off of each other. It's not like you can do 3 of the 5 and be Silicon Valley. You have to actually have all 5, basically, and they all work together to kind of create that kind of magic that happens there. But I think there's incredible, potential to bring all of those together. They're not unobtainable, right? It just requires the will to do it.
Go ahead, sir. Just quickly. I'll come to you after that. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, Vishnu, hi. Vishnu, you asked, in fact, there are two things that you asked about the language converters, that how the language accents basically pick up. So I would like to expand and add on to what he said, that we normally have a system called DLP, that is data language processors, working under an AI engine, and that AI engine is supported by devices which is M2M devices.
Right.
Now, M2M devices are further supported by listening devices which are installed at various places across the geographies, of which accent, like for instance, when you go to Americas, you install listening devices, and those listening devices basically transcript that data into your MTM devices, which earlier, and then in turn is fed into the DLP devices, which further form the core which these people then use to dispense their services. So this is how the accents are basically transacted into various systems, and they grow. They basically, the AI codecs then basically make them grow and multiply by themselves.
Sure.
So that is one part. And the second part that the gentleman was asking on the metaverse. So the metaverse system basically again is going to be a very, very strong derivative of the 6G systems or the Li-Fi system, because you need that kind of ecosystem to support the kind of, we worked on a metaverse project in 2003 when we started working with Steven Spielberg on Avatar.
Right.
So what you see in Avatar actually will be sort of a metaverse experience that you will, we all will see going forward. So in a room like this, you probably will see a metaverse ecosystem where you will be able to, like you are sitting and next to you there is a digital body sitting, and you are interacting in somebody's,
Parag's hologram, basically. In case he
Hologram.
chooses not to attend. Look, I need to wrap this up. I'm sorry, I can't take any more questions, but it's been a wonderful conversation, and I'd like to thank all of you very much for being with us. This is very much about, sustaining the dreams of 8 billion Indians, billions of Indians around the world. How do you actually take all of these ideas forward? How do you broad-base these ideas, and how can India be a real player when it comes not just to software, but also hardware solutions? Thank you very much,
Thank you.
all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.